Hello everybody. Welcome to the call. This is our number 3, our third live learning call for the Parenting Solutions membership page. I am so glad you've joined us. Feel free to stop and start the video if you're watching the recording, and I appreciate those who are able to make it live to all these calls. So thank you. We're going to jump right in to the content on setting limits with empathy and respect. So this is the gentle parenting way to be a strong leader and still protect our kids, keep them safe and healthy, and creating an environment that works for everybody. So without further ado, make sure you have a pen and paper. You might want to grab a copy of the worksheet. I'll show you. Actually, I've sent that in an email. Should also be in the forum under the files to go along with this. So here we go. I have my copy on one monitor today. Usually I have 3, so bear with me as I navigate through my slides here. Okay, so grab the worksheet, pen and paper. We're going to get going today. Today's topic, setting limits respectfully. And the secret to this, we're going to cover today. But before we get into that, we're going to cover why we should set limits in the first place. We'll go over how do we set limits. And we'll touch on just briefly, what if that doesn't work, and what? Ultimately, we have 3 choices when we're parenting. We can attempt to control our child. This is the authoritarian approach. We can choose to set no boundaries or limits, which is the permissive approach. Or we can choose something else. Let's talk just for a moment about the authoritarian approach. When we're setting limits, as parents, we can set the limit, hold the limit firmly, but if we're not allowing our child to express themselves, to have the feelings they have about our limits, if we're not teaching them the process of problem solving for themselves, if we're not modeling how to negotiate and discuss and have differences of opinion, and still accomplish what it is we need to accomplish, then we're stuck in this realm of control, where it's either our way or the highway, is a common expression. On the other end of the spectrum is permissive parenting. This is when we still value our child's autonomy, but for some reason we may be reluctant to set boundaries and limits with them. Maybe we want to avoid conflict. Maybe we don't want our children to feel negative feelings. Maybe we are so focused on respecting their autonomy that we're missing out on the opportunity to guide them and learn some skills that will help them move forward when we're not around. There are definitely some downsides to both ends of this spectrum. It's interesting, but a lot of parents, if they don't prefer one over the other, they might be stuck looking for something in the middle. They're trying to find a happy medium, which is where I was when I first started out. Where is that happy medium between my way or the highway, or you just do your thing and learn how the world works on your own and discover all of that for yourself. But what happens is, if we're in between those two somewhere, it's still our way or their way. It's either they win or we win, and it's still a power struggle. And you're going to have a power struggle regardless of whether you're on the permissive side of things or whether you're on the authoritarian side of things. The whole mindset sets us up for power struggles with our kids. So we want to look at something else, and that's what we're doing today. So how can I still be that strong leader in my family, which the authoritarians are really driven by, without being a big meanie or a jerk about it with my kids, which is what the permissive parents are really working hard to avoid. There is a third option. We can choose to be a strong leader while honoring our child's autonomy. Before we go any further, we should get a little clarity around a couple terms that we'll be talking about. And sometimes I use them interchangeably. They're really connected, they're really related, but there are a couple distinctions here. A boundary can be defined as the line you draw around yourself to define where you end and where your child begins. Limit setting is used when a child is incapable of making a responsible choice. It's when a parent needs to impose structure, when a parent creates a boundary or otherwise causes a child to comply. Now, comply to me has a bit of a loaded meaning, and I will be talking about a little bit more about that as we move forward. So compliance is what the authoritarian approach advocates for. We want our kids to do what we say, when we say it, cooperate, and for some reason this is the standard. That if your kids are cooperative, compliant, obedient, then you've done your job as a parent. But what happens is that when the parent isn't around, the child is going to go back to deciding what's in their best interest, what is in their best immediate interest. Because they haven't learned the skills to make those decisions for themselves. They've always had someone else to make the decisions for them. If we aren't setting any limits at all, knowing that our kids aren't able yet to make those responsible choices, we haven't given them the practice in a structured way to learn the consequences of certain actions. So that's why it's really critical that we learn to set these limits while also maintaining our child's autonomy. And that's where a lot of parents get stuck. They're either setting limits without recognizing and supporting their child's autonomy, or they're focused on their child's autonomy without setting any boundaries and limits. We need both. Dr. Laura Markham is a thought leader in this field, and here's her quote. Although rejecting the authoritarian role is a good thing, rejecting the role of a parent is not. All parents have a critical responsibility to teach and guide their young, That necessarily includes setting limits. We're going to talk a little bit next about why we need to set limits. Some of them are the obvious ones and some maybe not so much. 7 reasons to set limits. When a caregiver doesn't set firm limits, any of the following can occur. The child gets hurt, becomes overtired, develops poor nutrition. These are all things around safety and health. And it's our job as strong leaders in our family to insist, in a way that's respectful, that our child stays safe and is learning healthy habits, and that we're supporting their learning of healthy habits. That's part of our role. It's possible, if we don't set limits, that the child's desires are met at the expense of others. Now, we want to differentiate here between desires and needs. And it takes a little practice to learn the difference with your own child. The child's desires are met at the expense of others. So they get what they want, when they want it, how they want it, whenever they want it, at the expense of others. I'm all for meeting child's desires and definitely for meeting their needs. But part of our job is to teach them how to notice when others' needs may need to come first, when another person's needs can be met along with ours. Those are the win-win situations. So we're taking them through that process of evaluating. That doesn't mean that they can do that right away. It's definitely a process. and they need to be at a certain developmental stage to be able to do that. But we're going to assume that their intentions are good, and we're going to help them if they're having trouble with that. Number 3, the child learns that sadness, frustration, disappointment, all those negative emotions are intolerable. What I teach parents is that we should always be looking at the long view, our long-term goals for our child. What do we want them to learn, to know, to be capable of, to be as they grow up? We want them to be able to handle big emotions, good and bad. We want them to work through frustration, to be resilient, to stick to it, to continue in the face of adversity. We want them to be able to handle disappointment elegantly, with respect for others. They need to have the opportunity within a safe structure of the relationship we create to experience those feelings, to know that they're still safe, they're still loved, they're still connected with us, even though these emotions are there. And the more practice they have with those emotions in a safe and I'm frustrated, but I'm not going to be frustrated forever. I'm disappointed, but I can handle it. I'm sad, but I will feel happy again. When we meet all of their wants at the expense of others, meet all of their wants as soon as they want it, they miss out on that learning that these big emotions are okay. What's different about gentle parenting is that we're guiding them through that space and that permission to have those feelings, to experience them fully, to move through them, and to come out the other side okay. So when we say no to cookies for breakfast, yeah, they might be upset. I'd be upset too when I don't get cookies for breakfast when I want one. But we're know that we're still going to help them be healthy even when they're having a hard time, and we're also allowing for those feelings to come out. Parents who parent more gently and respectfully, they might be a little surprised when they set a limit and all of a sudden their child has a huge emotional breakdown. So they say, no, you can't have a cookie for breakfast. And they're expecting the child to, kind of gripe and complain a little bit. But then all of a sudden there's this huge outpouring of sadness. And they're a bit surprised. And this actually comes from a buildup of emotion that the child's been carrying. And by setting that limit, we're setting we're creating this safe space for their feelings. It's really not about the cookie. Although we don't want to tell them that, because at the moment it feels like it's all about the cookie. They don't understand that they're just bringing forth all of this other frustration and upset from, could be months ago, could be from last night. So in this space of safety of, no, you can't have it, but I'm here for you and I understand that you're upset, it allows all of these other emotions that are kind of linked to the initial upset, and it just brings it forward and gives them a chance to process that and move through that, using the cookie as kind of an anchor for where this is all coming from. Because otherwise the flood would seem pretty overwhelming and confusing to a child. So I think that connection to the cookie as being the reason just helps them stay grounded. When we don't set limits, the child never learns self-discipline. Important piece of a gentle parenting is to talk. And when you start out with parenting in this way, you'll find that you're talking your face off. They're talking. It seems like, well, we're not doing anything. We're just talking. My child did something wrong and we're just talking about it. It's not enough. It really is enough. And it will seem like a lot in the beginning, the first few years especially, or the first few years as you transition into this if your children are a little older. it's because we're laying a foundation. We're teaching and we're guiding. Think about the sports analogy of spotting. When a child first learns, let's say in gymnastics, they're learning a flip. When they first do it, the coach is going to physically help them through the movement so their body gets to know it. They're right there every step of the way. As they practice that a few times, the coach notices, okay, they're starting to get this. I'm going to back off a little bit. I'm not going to lift up that leg at the very end. And I'm going to allow them to try that part. And then a little while later, they're backing off a little bit more, but they're still there. In case anything goes wrong, they're spotting, they're ready to catch, they're ready to grab that arm, whatever it is they need to keep the child safe. And so as the child becomes more proficient, the coach is moving back more and more. Eventually, the coach is there to spot, encourage, maybe reteach part of it if it seems like there's a missing piece. And it's a little bit of a dance. So they're spotting, they're moving back, they're moving back, they're moving toward, they're moving back. And eventually, they can be on a chair on the sidelines as the child is performing after they've had enough practice and are confident. So that's what we're doing as parents too. We're teaching our kids self-discipline by giving them bits and pieces and talking them through it, guiding them through it, spotting, reteaching if necessary, and backing off as much as we can, as much as they're able, so that eventually they're doing it on their own. And that's the piece that the authoritarian approach misses, is the teaching. There's no chance for practice if the parent is controlling. Number 5, reason to set limit. The child feels uneasy and afraid because they want someone else to be in charge. They really do. They would never admit it. They would never verbalize it. They may not even be able to understand that. All they know is that they feel really uncomfortable. They want someone else to be in charge because they're new here. They're just trying to make their way and figure things out. And so much can be overwhelming and scary and confusing. They want someone bigger and stronger to protect them and be in charge. Sometimes they even need us to protect them from themselves. Number 6, the parents are constantly compromising things that are important to them or helpful to their children. Is this really the lesson we want them to learn long term? That in order to have a relationship that runs smoothly, you need to put yourself last. It's definitely not what I want to teach my kids. So we need to model that. Our needs are important too. And many of us have learned the hard way that when we don't get our needs met, that's when the ogre comes out. That's when we yell. That's when we're frustrated and resentful and we just want to run away to Mexico. Unless you're in Mexico, maybe you want to run to Canada. But that feeling of just, I can't take it anymore. Our needs aren't being met. So we need to model that for them. And we need to explicitly teach that others' needs are important too. Sometimes we need to wait. Sometimes we need to defer what it is that we want, or sometimes even need, because someone else's need is greater in that moment. So again, it's a bit of a dance. It's not always their way. It's not always our way. Whose needs are most important at this very moment? Is there a way we can meet both at the same time? Do we take turns? What's most helpful at this time? 7th reason to set limits. If we don't, the trust between the parent and child can actually be eroded. Think of the extreme example of permissive parenting. The child who has been labeled as spoiled gets everything that they want whenever they want. Like the girl in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I want a squirrel, Daddy. Get me a squirrel. She wants everything that she sees, and he goes out of his way to make sure that she's happy. She doesn't respect her dad too much. In fact, over time, she's going to respect him less and less. She's crying out for a strong leader. I'd like you to take a moment on the worksheet or a separate pen and paper and describe to yourself, no need to share unless you want to, how has the lack of healthy limits played out in your family? So you can pause the video and write that. Okay. So moving on to the next slide. As you practice setting strong limits with empathy and respect, you want to keep connection forefront in your mind. If your child feels connected to you, you will experience much greater ease and cooperation as you set limits. We will be talking about this a little bit more. If you've got any questions on this content, you're welcome to post them in the forum, send me a message, and I'll help you explore this in a little more depth. So the sweet spot for setting limits with empathy and respect. Empathize with your child's thoughts and feelings and opinions on the limit. It doesn't mean you're changing your limit, but you're letting them know that you understand where they're coming from. Sometimes this is all that a child needs in order to feel cooperative because they feel heard and respected. It's like, oh, okay, you get it. You know what I'm saying. All right, yeah, let's go now. Sometimes it doesn't work, and there can be a lot of reasons for that, which we can go into another time. It could be as simple as, I see you want the balloon, but your brother has it, and you feel strongly about it. We do need to be careful here with the empathy, though, because kids are very intuitive. They pick up on a lot of subtleties that we may not even realize that we're sending out. Be sure that your intent is to truly empathize with them. There's times that I have found I'm so used to using the empathy line. I hear you, you're upset about this, but then I get right into, but you need to cooperate with me anyway. And my son especially knows, as soon as I start to use one of my go-to empathizing lines, he knows he's not going to get what he wants, and he'll start pushing. So we all really need to ensure that we are trying to connect with them and truly seeking to understand their perspective. One thing you might find, at least this happens with me, is when I'm thinking of saying no to something, and I start the whole empathy line that I use, I realize myself, before my kids say anything at all to me, that, hey, they've got a good point. They have a good reason for being upset. Maybe this isn't an important boundary. Maybe this isn't something I need to insist upon. So as long as I have it already said, no, you can't have that, or no, we're not doing that now, as long as I haven't said that, I can say, you know what, you've got a good point. I think we can do that right now, or we can do this tomorrow, or what if we did this way and offer a compromise? So it helps me be more reasonable. It holds me accountable to being a reasonable parent, and it also obviously serves the purpose of letting them know, where they're coming from. If you have set a limit and you've changed your mind for a valid reason, there are some ways to, not to backpedal, but to change your mind and still be seen as a leader who follows through on what they say. We could definitely talk about that another time. Feel free to send me a question, or maybe we could do a post on it and start a discussion. When you're setting a limit, you need to be clear and direct. No, nothing wishy-washy, nothing vague, very clear and direct. No, you can't have a cookie for breakfast. No, you can't have a cookie now. We'll have cookies after lunch. You want to be concise. If your child is upset with the limit, it isn't the time to get into a big discussion about who, why, when, and maybe, and all of that. You want to be very short and to the point. Young children especially can get mixed up with an elaborate conversation and lose what the answer was. It opens the door to negotiating. And if you're not open to negotiating at that point, then you need to clearly say, excuse me, I know. You can ask your child why. Why do we pick up toys from the stairs? If they're upset, again, that's not the time. But if things are calm and you've got the time to have a chat, there's not an immediate safety concern, why do we pick up toys from the stairs? You might also, I had a good question about this earlier, and you can also ask yourself why. Again, if you've got the time, it's not an immediate safety concern, ask yourself, why am I insisting on this particular limit? Why have I created this boundary? And be really clear that it's an important one. If it's not, what could you do differently? And that leads us into number 5. As much choice for your children as possible, whenever possible. That doesn't mean that they're running the show, doesn't mean that they get their way, except for just once in a while. What it means is we respect their autonomy. They're growing, they want to be independent more than they were yesterday, more than they were 2 months ago. We need to encourage that and allow it. It's tough for a lot of us. We want our babies to stay small, and having ourselves challenged isn't fun, and sometimes that can get in the way. So if they can choose what pants they're wearing that day, great. You might not want to have a choice between long pants or a bathing suit if it's the middle of winter and you live in Canada like I do. But maybe blue pants and gray pants, they're pretty much the same. They're both going to do the job, but it gives your child some more autonomy in their life, which is really important. Save the no, save the firm limit, the hard line for the really big things, for the deal breakers, for safety, for ongoing health. So if you can offer a lot of choice in other areas of their life, giving them a chance to make decisions and maybe make a mistake and then try something different, talk through the problem solving. If that is there and present in more areas of their life, when it comes time to those hard lines, those deal breakers, they're more willing to cooperate with us. When there is no room for negotiation, use a statement. And again, back to the clear, direct, concise. Please sit. Tone is important. You don't want to sound like a big meanie. You don't want to sound wishy-washy. Don't want it to sound like a question. Please sit. No, we want to say, please sit. There's no negotiation there. That's not to say that we don't negotiate. We definitely do on some things. But how we need to set up a system so our kids know when does mom mean we can talk about it? When does she mean no, absolutely not? Number 7, empathize and restate the limit. So you've gone through your steps. They're still upset. I hear you. You really wanted those cookies, but we can't have them for breakfast. And then moving on to something else. If they're really upset, let them sit with it. Sit with them with it. Allow the space for those feelings to come out. Maybe they have some backlogged issues that they need to process. So the feelings themselves are fine at that point, but you can still hold to your limit. Keep the mantra in mind of connecting before you direct. Connect, then direct. If our child is feeling disconnected to us and bossed around all the time, they're not going to want to work with us. So allowing your child choice within the structure of healthy boundaries lets them feel safe and ultimately leads to greater independence and better decision-making in the long term. So that the structure then is the health and the safety. Those are the big picture items. It's morning routine, it's bedtime routine, it's having lunch around the same time every day. we always brush our teeth, we always get good sleep, we always drink water, we don't choose what, pop or whatever other things you need a boundary about. But within that is where they can have the choice. We make the big decisions that they're not able to make yet, and they make the decisions that they're capable of making, healthy ones. They really need that time to practice. So some key points, key takeaways. Just getting a drink of water. So let your child know that you're on their side. Maintain that connection. Connect first. Talk about, oh, I love that tower that you made, before you then tell them they have to leave it and come for lunch. Saying, I see you're having fun with your friends. You guys are having a great day today, but it's getting late. They need to go home. Connecting first. So by maintaining that connection with them and that relationship with teamwork, you maintain your influence, you grow your influence. It lets him or her know that you're on their side. That's when the cooperation comes, and the willingness to abide by our limits. Setting limits proves that you will keep your child safe when he cannot. You are making the decisions until he's able to make them. It empowers him, it gives him healthy boundaries, and teaches life lessons. So pause the video, take a moment, and write how you could apply this to a common scenario in your home. Okay, so here's the third part, and we won't be able to go into all of this. It's a really big piece, which is really great for doing one-on-one work. Group coaching, that sort of thing, can really deep dive into this. Maybe we can do another full call on it. Often parents will get stuck when it comes to setting limits, and there are a few areas that are most common. They can be stuck setting limits in the first place, saying no. They feel uncomfortable with it. There's some, what we can call hang-ups around it. They set limits, but they're not able to hold them, is another common area. They feel uncomfortable with holding those limits. So it's important to do some work around that. And there's another group of parents that get stuck with setting too many limits or too harshly without allowing their child to have some flexibility and some learning opportunities. So maybe if you're setting limits and they're not being followed, they're not working, there are a group of things in common about that you can work on. And then there was one final one, setting limits. Just 1 second. Okay. So getting stuck setting limits. For some reason, I've got a block right now. It'll come to me. So when limit setting isn't working well, it's important to deep dive into the beliefs that are underneath that. Start looking for patterns. These beliefs are often subconscious, unconscious, less than conscious, and these underlying beliefs affect our emotions and our behaviors. Results won't change if our beliefs conflict with our intentions. So we intend to stop yelling, but because of our beliefs about ourselves and the world and kids and relationships, we're not meeting our intentions. It's the beliefs that are underneath all of that. It's like an onion. We can peel back those layers and dig deeper and deeper, noticing the patterns that keep coming up in between situations. We can start getting a glimpse at those less than conscious beliefs that are affecting our results. So here's the other group of, it's another type of obstacle that parents can find when they're setting limits and it's not working. They're doing great. Peaceful parent, gentle parent, cruising right along, saying no, empathizing, connecting, all of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, boom, they lose it. And they revert back to how they were raised, most likely in an authoritarian way, because I said so, just do it. Why aren't you listening to me? And getting into that kind of a power struggle again. And that's a time to start looking at the patterns. Where else am I getting a similar result? Where else am I doing great, supposedly? And then all of a sudden I'm just losing it. Start looking at the beliefs. So there's something going on there around getting our own needs met, setting boundaries for ourselves, resentment, frustration, and trying to deep dive into where all of that is coming from. Support is really critical for this last piece, for figuring out why we're stuck with limits. And in fact, support is critical for looking at any patterns of behavior, and when we're looking for those beliefs that are holding us back. They're called limiting beliefs because they limit us. They get in the way of what we say we want, what we intend to have. And it's human nature to have a hard time seeing the patterns and the beliefs. It takes an objective person who cares about us and who doesn't have a vested interest in what we do or don't do in our lives. That objective person to help reflect back to you the patterns of beliefs that they notice that you're bringing up. We all have blind spots, and it helps to have somebody else to explore those with us in a safe way. So today we talked about 3 things: 7 reasons to set limits, 8 tips for setting limits with empathy, and touched on another huge topic of what happens when we're stuck setting limits. If you've got questions about setting limits with empathy, I invite you to connect with me. Be willing to work with you one-on-one if that's something that you'd like to dive in more deeply and get some customized support. And obviously, if you are a member, then you've got the forum where we can start discussions and the Q&A calls too. Speaking of Q&A call, we have another one coming up, so be watching your calendar for that. I'd like you to take 1 minute and write down one thing that you're going to start doing in the next 24 hours or stop doing in the next 24 hours. Commit it to yourself. In the next 24 hours, this is what you commit to. If you want to up the accountability level, post it in the forum and we'll help you hold to that. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you've got any questions, please reach out. Be glad to help you process some of this information. I know there's a lot there. My mentor likes to say it's akin to trying to drink from a fire hose. You get a drink, but there's a lot that passes us by. So I encourage you to re-watch this. Come back in, watch it again in a couple weeks or even tomorrow, and you'll get another layer out of it. There's always more that we can pull from this kind of information. Anybody who's doing anything around personal development will find that when you go back to a video or a book or a workshop, we continually get a greater depth out of that content when we come back to it, because we're bringing in other experiences and more knowledge and understanding of ourselves and the world and the topic. So when we come to that information again, we're connecting with it in a different way based on our experiences. So I encourage you to do that again. and jump into the forum, ask any questions, and I can't wait to talk to you again. Thanks.